So in this particular video, we use the power of BuildShip and FlutterFlow together to create a fantastic little chat application with streaming capabilities. Now that means as content is coming from the OpenAI platform, it's being delivered through the workflow of BuildShip through to your FlutterFlow application. That is what this video is all about. This is what we're going to walk through and build together. Now, just one thing to note is that this is a module within inside my BuildShip course, which is part of the No Code Academy. But I thought, because this is such an important topic, because it's something you guys have wanted, I wanted to get that out there into the community. So without further ado, let's get into the video and let's get cracking. Okay, so in this particular video then, we are going to build this particular application. So I'm going to provide you with a kind of the foundation project for FlutterFlow, which you can follow along if you use FlutterFlow as a front-facing application. And we're going to build out the workflow, and then we're going to come back here and we're going to put all of the meat on the bones. And once you understand this, you'll be able to take this into your own projects as well. So here it is, it's running, it's the final application. It's a little chatbot application I've got running inside of FlutterFlow. I'm going to hit my little chat window here. I'm just going to come here, I'm just going to paste in a quick kind of message I've got in the clipboard here, say you watching me type, hit the send. My question is up the top, and then of course streaming is now going to kick on. Now this is all coming from the BuildShip workflow itself. It's kind of opened up that stream. All of that data is kind of gradually being delivered to my front-facing application, of course, until it is then complete. And then of course it allows me then to carry on the conversation. So I'm going to ask it to kind of tell me more about two. So it kind of knows about the context. The assistant is geared up to solve my IT problems, and of course away it goes. It's now streaming data back from the workflow, and of course I can now carry on having that particular conversation. So that is streaming in a quick nutshell as a sample. We're now going to head over to now BuildShip. We're going to build that workflow out, and then in part two we're then going to add the functionality into a kind of a half-built starter project for you to follow along in this particular series as well. So let's head over to BuildShip now. Okay then, so before we get our hands dirty with building our workflow with inside BuildShip, let's talk a little bit about the steps that we are going to take on this journey. So on the left hand side there you can see my front end application, which in this particular video is going to be a FlutterFlow application, but of course it could be any kind of front end application. And what we're going to do is we're going to initiate that chat conversation. Now what's going to happen is we're going to make an API call there. We're going to pass in the prompt, which is just going to be the simple prompt that the user will key in. But the key thing is we're not going to pass in a thread ID at this particular point because it's a brand new conversation. Now that is then in turn going to then invoke a BuildShip workflow, and of course it's that workflow which will now kind of do all of the crazy stuff for us. So we're going to get hold of those input parameters that's going to be passed into our REST API trigger, and then the magic really does happen with inside that OpenAI assistant streaming node, where what we'll do is we'll build up all of the values that we need inside that particular node itself. Then at runtime it's then going to invoke the OpenAI services, and then what's going to happen is then we're going to kind of gradually return all of that data back into the workflow, which we're going to pass on to our client application as it gets delivered. But along the way, what's really important as well is that when we invoke that OpenAI system, we are going to get back a thread ID. Now that is the conversation ID that we're pretty well much going to have here. We need to find a way to pass that back to our client application. I'll show you how we'll do that when we start building out the workflow itself. And then finally, of course, you've got the return node, which is really just going to be returning back this streamed response from the OpenAI sort of streaming node. So in a nutshell, that's how that bit works. And then of course on the result that comes back, you can see here that we got the workflow there on the left hand side. The stream comes in as a response from our actual API itself. We've got the thread ID included, we've got the stream, and of course naturally that will then be presented with inside the front end application. So that sounds a lot, that sounds quite complicated, but actually it's really quite straightforward when you follow the steps through, which is what we're going to do in this particular video. So let's now move on and let's start building out the BuildShip workflow. Okay, so back in BuildShip, let's create our workflow. Let's move over to our workflows here, hit the plus, let's give this a name. So I've called mine Streaming Assistant, hit create there like that. New workflow's created. Now, of course, the first thing we need to do is add a trigger in. So let's add the trigger. Now, this is just going to be the REST API call trigger. That's what we're going to invoke from our client application. Hit add trigger here. Let's give our path now. This is the name, the endpoint name that we need for our REST API. So I've called this one assistant stream like that. Now this is going to be a post request because we're now going to add in a series of input parameters into our body. We're going to want to pass over the prompt from our front facing application, and also as well, if we have the thread ID, we want to be able to pass that into this particular request as well. So hit the plus on the body, hit to rename. Let's do the prompt first like that. It's going to give this a name like that. Now this is going to be a string. Now let's just create a new one here. Click on rename. Now this is going to be thread ID with an uppercase I, by the way, so just make sure you've got the uppercase I in here as well. Let's give this a name of thread ID as well. Now I noticed that sometimes it doesn't kind of update you here, and you kind of have to like go back and then do that like that. So if you have that little quirk with inside BuildShip, I'm sure they'll fix that at some particular point. So there we go. So prompt and thread ID are all perfectly placed. So hit the save, and that is our REST trigger setup. Now hit the pluses where it gets a little bit more interested. This is where we now need to add the OpenAI node in here. Of course, just do a search for OpenAI. You can see a wealth of kind of different nodes that the BuildShip supports. Now this is one that you might have used up until this point, but of course we've now got the stream response one. So that's the one that we need. So just hit stream response. Now this allows us, of course, now set up all of the particular values that we need. So let's now start filling in these details here. So the API key, we need to go over to the platform website. We need to grab that. So I'm just going to move over here. Now this is my kind of my platform. So I've logged in, and here I'm using the actual legacy API keys here. I'm going to create a brand new secret. So I'm just going to do one here called streaming assistant, something like that. Hit create secret key, and in just a moment, there is my key. I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard, move back into BuildShip, and of course I can now go to the API key here. I'm going to secrets, and I'm going to add a brand new secret. Choose add secret there, and we can give our secret name. So I'm just going to call this one OpenAI because I might want to use this for another sort of workflow. Just hit save like that, and of course that should then now be persisted with inside the kind of secrets manager with inside BuildShip. We can use that again. So of course I can now just select that. There it is, and just click away. So we've got our first sort of parameter set. Now we need to get our assistant ID. So I'm just going to move back over again into the platform, and I'm going to move over here to the assistance option. This is on the platform site, and you can see here I've got my IT support technician here. You can see here I've got this assistant ID, so I'm just going to kind of grab hold of that just there. I'm just going to copy that into the clipboard, and you can see here this is just a really basic assistant. I've gave it some basic instructions here right off the bat. I'm not going to override these with inside my workflow, but I've got them with inside this here, and of course I can change these at any particular point. So it's really quite straightforward. So I can just move back now over to BuildShip and go here with my assistant ID. I'm just going to simply kind of paste that value in there, so I've got my assistant. Now instructions I'm going to keep clear because I don't need to override or add any sort of additional instructions into this particular OpenAI system. And my user prompt is going to come from the parameter, the trigger parameter that I've got here. So of course we can just simply come in here. We can go to the variables, we go to the request, and of course in the body, just select that, and of course there is the prompt there. Straightforward string value is going to be there. And now of course we've got the thread ID as well. So just select that and go to the variables, go to the request, go to the body, and there is our thread ID as well. So we quite simply pass that in. And that is all that we need to do from a very, very simple setup perspective. Now, of course, I'm not adding any additional nodes here. Of course, there's plenty of videos to go and have a look at on how to kind of extend out this particular section here. And of course, if you're not familiar with this bit and you're watching this as a course within inside the Academy, then I'll be adding more videos in there which will talk about adding nodes in and kind of using the power of the OpenAI assistants. But that is for another video. But of course, there's plenty of resources out there and documentation that kind of shows you how to kind of use that. So we're just going to keep this really, really simple right now. It's going to respond with simple questions, and of course we now need to return back now the result from the actual stream itself. Now we're just going to select a regular kind of flow node here, so just to hit return here. Now we are only going to just click on the little pen here, go to the variables, and we are going to go straight to the OpenAI assistant stream. Just select that and then go to the response stream itself. So that is it from a nutshell. There is one more little thing that we need to do, and I wanted to keep this to last. I want to explain a little bit more about this. But we also need to associate with the response that's coming back in the return. We need to associate the thread ID that's going to be produced from the OpenAI assistant. Now, when you come in here for the very, very first time, it's a brand new conversation. There is no thread, but we need to pick that thread ID up, and we need to somehow pass that back to our client application. We're returning back the stream here, so the kind of the data as it's being produced is being returned back to our client application, but of course we need to return the thread ID. So how do we do that? Well, there's a very convenient node within inside BuildShip that allows us to set a header, a response header that we can pick up with inside our client facing code, which will be our thread ID, and we can add that just in between here. So just with the little plus, hit that, we now can do a little search here. Let's see if I can find it. I'm just going to put header, there we go, set response header. So select that. Now here is talking about a header key and a value. So the header key is what we're going to reference with inside our client application to say, right, go and grab that header value, and we're going to reference it by a key, and of course the value we're going to sort of pop in here. Okay, so the header key that we're going to put in, let's give this a name. So I'm going to call this x-thread ID. In fact, I'm going to do ID like that. So there it is. I've just kind of given it a name there. Now what'll happen is that when you pick this up within your code, it's going to kind of be lowercase anyway, but I've put it in there as that. Now the header value will come from this particular node here as well, so we can reference this node up here. So just go to header value, go to the variables, go to the stream, just select that, and of course there is the thread ID. So you can see here that this is kind of like the object that is returned as a result from the OpenAI assistant kind of service, and you can see here that we're getting back the stream, which we've already handled, and there is the thread ID itself. So just select that, just click away, and you can see that we've now got those associated. So we don't need to worry in this particular video about what this one kind of represents. I'm just going to select that to be false. I'll likely cover that in other parts of the actual course as well, if I feel that that's applicable. But for us, we just want a straight header that's going to be returned back that we just hook onto with inside our code. So I'm just going to keep that as false there. So that is pretty well much it. Our workflow is complete. That's all that we need to do. So let's give our workflow a quick test just to see if it kind of works for us. Now, we're not going to kind of see the streaming capability here, but at least we should be able to test our workflow. So just go up to the test here. Now I'm going to go to the body, and I'm going to put some body in here. So this will kind of simulate what's going to kind of come from our kind of front-facing application. So I'm just going to put in here, I have a computer problem, something like that. No worries. And then in the thread, I'm just going to put the thread ID in there, and I'm just going to keep this there as an empty string. I'm going to hit test workflow. Now, fingers crossed, hopefully that will go out to OpenAI, and then we should get a response back. But again, remember, we're not going to see the streaming here because that's something that we are going to manage with inside the actual client itself. So you can see here, I've got a response back. That's all looking pretty good. I've got a status OK back. That's pretty well much all I need here. We don't need to worry about the detail here, but we know that that is all pretty well much set up for us. So we're good. So we can just hit the simply hit the ship here. That should all be nicely set up for us. And there is our endpoint URL. Just make sure you kind of got this copied endpoint to the clipboard, because we're going to need to use that very, very shortly. So that's it. That's the workflow all set up. Let's now move over to the client-facing application, which is a FlutterFlow. And let's now work on the second part, and let's get all of this kind of working with inside our application. Excuse the interruption in your learning, but I just wanted to reach out to you to let you know about the Digital Pros No Code Academy. This particular private community is fantastic. It's got all of my training content there, lots of written articles, question and answers, a code library, lots of topics around the no code space, and a fantastic community. Please do check the link in the description. It'd be great to have you part of the community. So in these courses, it's always great to be able to follow along with a particular example. Now, the link in the description contains a starter FlutterFlow project, which you are very, very welcome to clone and follow along in this particular video. But as I like to do with most of these particular videos, I like to give you a little walkthrough in terms of the actual FlutterFlow application itself, because I've already kind of like pre-loaded this application with kind of the styling, the widgets, and some kind of really basic functionality. And of course, we're going to do all of the key stuff within this particular video, but it's just nice to walk through so you can kind of get orientated with the starter project. So on the left hand side then inside FlutterFlow, you can see here I've got my home page, which is a single page inside this particular application. I've got a series of components. These two components are really quite simple. It's just kind of a little empty list message, and I've got a little indicator, a little animated indicator that will appear in the bottom right hand corner of the main kind of chat window. Then I've got the AI chat component, which looks a little bit more complex in nature, but really all this is doing is kind of presenting to the user the kind of the conversation. We have a list view in this particular kind of this component, which is kind of has a series of children that's kind of bound up here on the top here. You've got the generated dynamic children. You can see here that each one of these represents a chat, and this is coming from a component state variable called the chat history. Now, the chat history is kind of just located here. We've got a number of kind of component state variables. We've got the chat history here, which has a type of data type content, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then we've got the thread ID here. This is that thread ID I was talking about previously. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of set this so we can track this with inside the component. So as soon as the chat starts, we get that first response back. We're going to persist the thread ID with inside the component state variable, and we're going to keep passing that back into BuildShip as the kind of the conversation continues. So that's there as well. And this little AI responding is just a little Boolean indicator, which is currently set to false by default. And it's this little thing here. It's a little visibility behind it, some conditional visibility that kind of says, if that is true, then show the little animation. When it is false, then we can switch that off. And we can handle that with inside our actual custom action, which I'm going to introduce you to very, very shortly, where it's going to kind of some callbacks, and we can kind of activate these things, and we can turn these things off when we need to with inside this particular project. So that is the AI chat component. We'll come back to that very shortly, and we'll kind of hook up all of the actions that sit underneath this particular send button. Elsewhere in the project, we don't have anything in the app values here other than the stream response. Now, this is going to be quite essential, this one is here, because as the data is being delivered back from the BuildShip workflow, we're going to kind of load up this app state variable, which is going to be the streamed response. And ultimately, that's going to make its way then into the actual chat itself. And we'll kind of walk through a little bit more about that at the moment. But just remember that there is a kind of a holding app state variable there that will take receipt of all of that information that comes back. And then, of course, we'll clear that down once that's kind of been delivered. But I'll kind of go through and walk through that very, very shortly. The is dark mode thing, just completely ignore that. If you click on the little logo in the application, it will toggle it between light and dark mode, so you get the best of both worlds, depending on how you like to sort of use your applications. And what else have we got here then? So there's nothing special going on here. We don't have any kind of any API calls or anything like that, because they are handled with inside the custom action that I'm going to introduce you to very, very shortly. Because just one thing to note here, that with inside FlutterFlow, streaming is not supported out of the box, so we have to kind of use some custom action code there in order to kind of make all of this kind of stuff happen. But you don't need to write any code in this particular kind of video, because I'll just walk you through very briefly over what that code is doing, just to kind of orientate you with kind of the kind of the features of the code. Elsewhere, there's nothing more to kind of mention about other than these data types here. So these data types here, I've kind of kept them here because this is the kind of the shape of, if you weren't using streaming and you were using regular kind of chat completions API with inside the OpenAI platform, then you can use the same kind of structure here. And I'm just going to really just hook onto these for this particular example. So we're going to kind of load these up with data. We're going to add that to our component state variable. And of course, ultimately, it's then going to be presented with inside this chat kind of list view that we've got here. So the rest of it, we've got some animations, we've got some kind of conditional visibility going on here. You can see here we've got some kind of code expressions, and we've got some bits and bobs that's going on here on the right hand side. You've got a conditional code expression that we got there. So there is a couple of different things kind of going on here, but again, take the sample, delve a little bit deeper into these, and then you'll get an idea of kind of how this works. And of course, there's nothing stopping you at all from kind of copying the kind of the all of the widgets that you got here into your own project to kind of have the same kind of feature set. So very lastly then, we just got this custom action just to mention to you about this custom code here. So you can see here I've got this custom action. It's called a stream response. I've got some code in here. Again, you don't need to type anything here. I've got everything set up here, but let me just kind of walk you through it a little bit, just so you can kind of understand it. So here we've got some arguments that we've kind of got, which we're going to set when we add this custom action into our action flow editor. So we've got the callback itself, the on-stream callback. So as you recall previously when we're talking about the BuildShip workflow, as we start receiving back the data from the BuildShip workflow, we have this callback. And this is where we're going to do the kind of the activity that I spoke about just a moment ago, where we've got the app state variable, which we're going to kind of load up with this data as it comes in. So that's what the on-stream callback will do for us. The on-error callback, of course, if we get an error come back, then we can do something with it. We're not really doing much with it inside this application, but of course we need to handle the error situation. And when we complete, so when all of the data, the stream is complete, and we have all of our data come back, then we just can have the on-complete callback where we can carry out a number of different actions once the data is all done. So for example, you know, the little loading indicator we got there, we can just switch that off, and you can see here that that's what the on-complete callback will do for us. We need to pass in the URL. So this is your BuildShip Workflow URL. We need to pass that in. There is the prompt, of course, that is just the text within inside that text field, and the thread ID, we're just passing in, of course, once we have that, we can then pass it through. So just walk through a little bit in the code here, just to kind of set the scene. So here is our kind of request. This is our kind of our setting up our API request here, where we're kind of setting what the prompt is and what the thread ID is. So that is the kind of the body that I demonstrated earlier in the workflow that we're going to pass in. Then, of course, we're going to have the kind of the stream response. So we're going to kind of kick this off, and then we're going to kind of then perform the send. So we're going to invoke that kind of request into the BuildShip workflow. Now, of course, when that request comes back, we're just going to grab hold of that X thread ID. So do you remember we set it as a header within inside the workflow itself? Well, this is just a way for us to be able to retrieve that back here. You can see I've got the stream response.headers, and we're going to put that into a variable called response thread ID. So once we've got that, then of course we can use that a little bit later. And then this is the bit that kind of is the key bit here. And I'm not going to kind of delve too much into this, but really we kind of got this stream. So as the values are coming in, you can see here that we're setting the app state variable, the stream response app state variable with every value. So we're just going to keep adding it on. That's what that plus equals is. It's kind of it's getting the stream response app state variable, and it keeps adding on every single value that just keeps coming back from that BuildShip workflow. And then, of course, we're then going to invoke the actual callback. So that callback is going to be important to us. We're going to call it each time we get a value, callback, 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 and then we're going to do something with inside that callback, and I'll talk you through that in just a moment. Here is the on error situation. Of course, if we have an on error callback defined, then we can then call it. And of course, here is the on done. So once we've received all of that data back, then of course we're just going to then sort of invoke the callback itself, but we're going to pass in the thread ID. This is really, really important. So we've got the thread ID up here. We're going to pass this back on the complete, and with inside the action in a moment, what we're going to do is we're going to then persist that to the component state variable called thread ID. So that's really important. If we don't have that, we're not going to be able to keep that conversation going. And of course, every time we do a chat, we're going to keep getting a new conversation. It won't remember anything at all about what we previously said. So that is the code. I just want to quickly walk through that with you. Of course, if you're not a coder, hopefully that just gives you a little bit of an insight to kind of how the code works within inside the custom code section. So this is a custom action, and we're going to add that very shortly into our application. Okay, so we have our starter project all cloned. Let's now start making this project do something. So let's get straight into the action. Choose the AI chat component. This is where most of the work is going to happen. Go down here to then the send button, and this is where we're now going to kind of start and initiate that particular conversation. So the first thing that we need to do though is we need to validate, has the user actually keyed in any details? Now I actually have a form widget within inside the page itself, so I'm going to validate that first because I've got a rule on it to say anything more than 5 characters, then it must be valid. The user has typed something in, and I can now move on and carry on with these actions so long as the form is valid. So with this first one selected, let's just do a search for a validate form. Just select that, and set the form to validate is called prompt form. We know that we're past that if we're valid, so let's hit plus, add action. So now what we need to do is we now need to set the component state. Now what we need to do here is we need to add our prompt that we just typed in to the very first entry within inside the list itself. So we do that and just say set fields here, and we're going to select our chat history. So this is what we're going to pop into that chat history. Select the update data type, and we're going to add to the list. Choose the value to add. Now, if you remember, I showed you just on the preview of the starter project is we had some data types selected. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a content data type object. Then with inside that, we're then going to create a text data type object inside that, and then we're going to set the value of that, because that's what's going to be displayed within inside the user interface. Now, of course, if you decide to not do streaming, or you want to go back to regular kind of chat GPT style chat, then it means this project can remain true, because you can reuse these particular data types if you so wish. So I'm going to create a new data type here of the content. I'm going to add a field. Now I'm going to go down here. Now I'm going to select the text. I'm going to choose the value, and I'm going to create the data type object of text. And then now I'm going to set the value within inside that, because we have this field called value. Now we just need to grab hold of then the widget state. Now this is the content that's typed into the actual text box itself. So choose prompt text field, and then we know that we've got that. Hit confirm, and we now know that we're going to have that first entry within inside our chat history. Okay, so next up, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, because we're going to kind of do the same thing again, but I'll try to explain a little bit about why we're doing it. So if you remember what I said previously about the kind of the stream, we're kind of temporarily holding the values that comes back from BuildShip into the app state variable. What we need to do though is once every time that those values are added, we need to update a new entry within our chat history that contains all of those values as they are coming in. So we're going to create a new entry within inside our kind of our chat history, ready for all of those values to go in. So it's kind of like simulating the response that kind of comes back from the BuildShip workflow. It represents kind of like the AI entry that's coming back into our chat history. That might not make too much sense, but really what I'm trying to do is to say I've got my user one, and now I've got an empty one ready to take receipt of all of the information that comes back from the BuildShip workflow. So I'm just going to go up here to state, like that, update component state, and I'm going to now go up here, set the field, go to chat history, go up to select update type, say add to list, choose the value to add. I'm going to create a brand new content object there. I'm going to choose add field, and I'm now going to just then select text, and I'm just going to then set a value, and here I'm just going to say text and just say confirm. So I've just kind of created an empty one ready for us to add in our streamed content. So just hit confirm. That's all set up for us. Okay, so next up, this is where it really does get interesting even more so now, because this is where we're going to add our custom action in. Now, this is where we're going to now need to set up a whole host of different kind of actions and values for our custom actions. So hit the plus here, add action, and you can see here we've got this option for custom actions, and this is that stream response custom action, the kind of the code that we saw earlier. So just select that, and this is where it opens up all of these arguments. So you remember when I was talking through the code, we kind of had all of those arguments there at the top. Well, this is where we kind of set them all up. So the on-stream callback, let's go into there first. So choose open, and then we're kind of into this whole new kind of action kind of flow view now, where we can start adding all of the actions that's going to be executed every time we do that callback. Every time we receive a little bit of data, then keep executing these actions within here. So what are we going to do first? Let's add an action in, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to state, and we're just going to update the app state. That's it. This is going to force a rebuild of all of our app state variables, because what will happen is that in a moment, as each of these keep getting called, I'm going to want to keep refreshing it, because within inside that code, we are adding the values onto app state variable, but we need to kind of rebuild the kind of the user interface. Okay, so that's really important. So we've got that in there. We don't need to set any fields. It's not needed. This will just force a rebuild. So next up, let's hit the plus, hit add action, and we need to go to then the state here, like that, update the component state. Now what we're going to do here now is we're going to kind of grab hold of, get a reference to the last chat history item we put in there. So we just outside of this, if you remember, we put that empty one in there. Now we're now going to get hold of it now. We're going to get a reference to it, and we can then start adding values into it as the kind of the chunks come in from the actual stream itself, the values that come in from the stream. So how do we do that? We need to get hold of it first. So we need to set the field, and we're going to choose the chat history. We're going to select update type here, and we're going to update an item at the index. And now, of course, we need to run a code expression now to kind of work out what position, where is it in our actual chat history itself? Well, we know it's right at the end, but if you know anything about kind of coding, you know that when you deal with lists, everything starts with a 0. So if you've got 20 items in your list, you know that it's 0 to 19. So we just need to get hold of the value at the index of 19. In our case, it's going to be the very last one in the list. So item index here, what we can do is we can go down here to code expression. We need to add an argument. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this now as the length. So this is just really going to get the length of the list itself. So this is going to be of type integer. Now the value that we're going to select here, we can just go then into our component state. We can go to our chat history, choose available options, and it's the number of items. Just hit confirm. So we've now got this kind of argument called length, which we can now use in the code expression. So all we simply need to do is say length -1. So as I said, we've got 20 in there, -1, 19. That's great. Hit check errors, and that should all come back good. And hit confirm like that, and we've now got our value. Now we now need to select the update type, so select that, and we're going to update the fields itself. Now this is where we now need to set the actual field. So remember that we got that kind of that text, that value field. That's what we now need to get a reference to now. So just choose add fields here, go into the text, we then select update fields again, and of course we now need to go inside it. So choose add fields here, and it's the value. And now we need to set the actual value itself. Now remember, at this point we kind of got that app state variable, that stream response is kind of doing all the magic. So just click on the value here. We can go into the app state, and we can go to the stream response and just hit done. So we're setting the stream response inside that text value, which obviously is going to be then displayed on the user interface itself. Hit done, and that is it. That's going to kind of now start setting those values for us on the very, very last entry of inside our chat history. Okay, so next up, because our UI needs to keep up with the content that's coming in, we need to make sure our list view is always scrolling to the bottom. Now, there's a bit of a quirk in FlutterFlow at the time of recording this particular video that I'm just going to make you aware of, that it may happen to you or it may not. What I would typically do now is I would hit on the plus here, I would add action, and what I would look for is then a scroll. And you can see here this scroll to is kind of grayed out, which doesn't make any sense because on the actual page itself, there is a list view which is scrollable. So I don't understand why it's grayed out, but I can resolve that quite quickly. If I just delete that particular action, if I just close out of this, I go back into these actions here. If I just hit the plus here and hit add action, I can then add the scroll to here. I could just add scroll to, and I can choose then the chat list view. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to select this now, and I'm going to cut this. I'm going to go back into my on-stream callback, and I'm just going to paste it in here, and of course it's working. So I don't understand what's going on there, but try that yourself. Hopefully it should be resolved at the time of you watching this, or it doesn't happen for you, but it's certainly happening for me with inside the kind of the Mac version of FlutterFlow. It might be if you're using the web, then it may be fine in that instance. So that's all set, that's good. So that means that our scroll will now keep up with the content that's coming in. So let's just hit close there, that's all now done. Okay, so there's further work that we need to do. Hit the send button, open up the action flow editor. One thing I want to quickly do, because I forgot to do it earlier on, is on the update component state, when we sort of started kicking off the chat request, one thing we didn't do is toggle the AI responding. We want to kind of show that little loading indicator. We didn't do that. So with that selected, just say a toggle value, and that means it will go from false to true. So we know it's in play. And of course, later on, on the on complete, we'll toggle that back so it goes back to false. Right, let's move back down to the custom action. There's some further work that we need to do here. I'm not going to worry about the on error callback at this particular point. If you look in the final project, it's just got like a little dialogue that comes up and shows the string kind of error response that comes back if there is one. So we won't worry about that here, but this is where we need to do the on complete callback. This is quite important to us. So open up this here. The first thing we need to do now is add the action, and this is where we now need to do a component state update. So what we now need to do is we now need to set the thread ID. So we know we got it passed at this particular point because it's coming back as a callback parameter on the complete. So just choose a thread ID here, and we can now set the update type. We want to set the value, and the value to set will be here. It's an action parameter. So select that, and there is the thread ID. So we've now got that persisted with inside our component state. Now what we can also do here is that we can add another field here, and we can go to the AI responding, and this is where we now just need to then toggle that value back to false. That means that little loading indicator will now kind of disappear from view. And one final thing that we need to do, remember we got that temporary temporary stream response here. Let's just clear that down. Once we're done, we know we don't need any of that content anymore. So let's clear that down, ready for the next request. So let's go here. Can we do it here? Yeah, let's go to add action. Let's go then to state. And let's go to update app state, set the fields, choose the stream response, and we just go to select update type. Let's just clear the value, not interested in it anymore. So close that down, and that is all good. So I would say that is pretty well much most of the callbacks now kind of all configured. Obviously we didn't do that one there, but we now need to work on just these more simple ones here. So the URL is going to be the BuildShip URL that we're calling. So that's our workflow URL. Let's go and quickly grab that. So let's move over to another tab. So here it is. So let's now just grab hold of that again. I've probably lost it from my clipboard. In fact, there's the link, sorry. Click the copy. Let's go back now, and let's now paste that into then the URL. There it is. Just paste that in there. So that's all good. The prompt. Now that is going to be quite simply then the kind of the widget state, and here's the prompt text fields. That's the text of the user keys in the box, and here is that wonderful thread ID that we're keeping a track of. Let's now choose the component state, and there is the thread ID there. So that is all of the configuration to the custom action now all complete. And then one final thing that we need to do just down here, of course the user just keyed in something in the text box. Let's now just reset that. So go to add action. Let's go to then a reset form fields like that, and let's just go down here, say reset form fields, and say reset text fields like that. That's now kind of all complete for us. Now we've got a little error that's kind of popping up here. What is that talking about? There we go. I forgot to click the little text box. There we go. Schoolboy error. There we go. That's all set on the reset form fields option. So that error is now gone. So good. I think we are all good there. That's pretty well much that button all set up. Now I think we might be in a position where we can test this. I'm hoping that I've kind of got everything right and set up correctly, but the only way we're going to find out is if we try running it. So let's now load up the local run. I'm just going to move up here. I'm just going to kind of test this, and it's just going to kind of do the build, and let's see what happens on the run. So let's flick over there now. Okay, so here we are in local run. Now the reason why I'm using local run, of course, is because using the iOS simulator, we can support streaming as well. So we'll see the streaming response. Now this probably wouldn't work in a web browser. Well, it certainly wouldn't work in a web browser because it doesn't support streaming. So you need to make sure that you are running this in some kind of local run. Now, whether that's on an Android emulator or in the iOS simulator. So right, super nervous. Let's give this a go. Let's see if we've got everything hooked up and working fine. So I hit the chat. So the chat window pops up. Let's put the kind of the message in here. My computer is getting hot. Let's hit the send. Let's see what happens. Okay, that's looking good. We've got our first message up there. Whoa, look at this. This is not looking too bad, is it? We seem to have streaming working quite nicely. Now let's hopefully see if does the scroll work. No, okay, we haven't quite scrolled down yet. Let's tell me more about 2 or something. Let's hit the send. Let's see if that's working. Okay, so there we go. That's looking pretty good. So it looks like we're continuing that conversation. So our thread ID must be still maintained. Let's just do one more for good measure. What about 4? Something like that. Let's see if it carries on. I want to put maybe a scroll to or something like that once we hit the send, just to kind of make sure that we move it down once the user's actually keyed in that particular message. But of course, there's all tweaks along the way. So this is looking really good. That is working perfectly. So we know our workflow is working perfectly. We know we got streaming working with inside this particular sample application. I would say that's a pretty good test right off the bat there. So there you go. That's one technique of adding streaming to your FlutterFlow application using BuildShip as the back end. Hopefully you enjoyed this particular video. Please do hit the like button. Of course, please do subscribe to the channel if you love the content I produce. Certainly all this sort of full walkthrough content that I produce. If you want a little bit more, please do check out the links in the description, because of course you've got the Digital Pros and No Code Academy. If you love BuildShip, if you love FlutterFlow, please do head over to the community. It'd be great to see you there. There's more content there, and there's an evolving BuildShip course there as well. So I'll be gradually adding to that over the weeks and the months in 2024. So until the next video, I'll see you soon.